Chapter 14. The Chapel. 17th hour, 2nd day, 3rd month, year 807, post-Heavenfall. You missed the finer points of the lesson, Father Gama said wearily as he unscrolled a map on top of his office desk. Look here. He pointed to the topography diagrams. You were correct in your exam answer regarding the distance General Kalaros had to cover, and that they didn't have enough soldiers to overwhelm Jerris's lines. However, what else did we also mention in class? The student stared downward at the map, as if hoping the answer would spring up from the paper. Father Gama waited patiently for a few long seconds before his pupil finally answered. The terrain was uphill against the attackers, making it harder to charge? Yes, correct. But what else? The student gazed again at the paper and tried to will himself into remembering another solution. Ultimately, he shook his head and replied he didn't know. Gama breathed out a small huff of disappointment and decided to usher in another candidate waiting outside the open doorway. Ariya, do you recall what you wrote regarding Kalaros? Yes, she said, entering the office. I answered that the slope of the terrain made his army's ranged attacks less effective before the charge, and it also didn't help that his opponent's forces had ample time to entrench themselves defensively. Additionally, the fences and hedges of the farm acted as obstacles that funneled them into Jerris's spell barrage. Communication was also a failure point, since the charge was meant to be timed with a flanking maneuver. Well said, Gama grinned. As noted by Ovyliax's tenets, you avoid uphill charges and be sure to have enough men to overwhelm a fortified position. Kalaros did neither of those and failed. Do you understand that now? Yes, sir. I have faith you'll do better next exam, Gama encouraged with a sincere smile. The student nodded meekly as he departed. Finally finished, the cleric offered Ariya the open seat in front of his desk. Good evening. What brings you in today? I appreciate your availability, she politely greeted. I notice the next chapter will be looking into the Emerald Scarves' rebellion against Edenvalia. I remember their defeat was orchestrated by a partnership between the late king, Surin Lorien, and the current Grand Minister, Riffian Marakoth. As Ariya began the conversation, she studied the room closely. Rather than sharing the open office space with the other Sentinel faculty, Father Gama had the special privilege of taking advantage of the rectory near the chapel. Yet, calling it a privilege was debatable, considering the room was smaller than Ariya's walk-in closet back home. Various knickknacks of statuettes, award plaques, mineral rocks, and alchemy containers were scattered about the room, and compounded to the clutter of books and papers stacked high. Thankfully, the open doorway and opposite window alleviated some feelings of claustrophobia. Gama beamed brightly at the topic. I had a feeling that part of my syllabus would catch your attention. Their partnership was invaluable to the survival of the Commandery's royal family, both before and after the crisis. King Lorien was recognised for his magnanimity, but he was also indecisive and anxious about people becoming upset by his choices. Marakoth's strategic genius and shrewdness helped to clear the king's mind and point him in the right direction. As a result, the rebellion was, thankfully, a brief affair. All of it was before my time, but it's fascinating to dive into the past histories of people you were acquainted with. My curiosity had me reading the textbooks ahead, but it seemed to be more of a summary of events. I was hoping you knew of more details. It's one of my favourite topics, and I hope others would also take keen interest. I could offer supplemental reading material. Do you happen to have any on hand? Ariya asked, hoping to glean some understanding into how he organised his texts. Father Gama stood up and perused through the small bookshelf behind him. Matter of fact, I do. I was looking through these to plan the upcoming lectures. Artiso Moss's Histories of Edenvalia is a fine one to start with. The same can be said of Shaw's Rise and Fall of the Emerald Scarves. He pulled the books out and handed them to Ariya, who very quickly flipped through them. What about articles or essays? Hoping for something more narrow in focus, he asked, shifting to a pile of papers on the connected side desk. Garma pulled his collection of papers and handed them to Ariya. Unfortunately, I'm still using these, so you'll either have to find another copy of them in the library. They sound exactly like what I am looking for, Ariya said, as she pretended to look through her knapsack and then feigned a look of disappointment. Sorry, I forgot my notebook. Do you have a piece of paper or parchment I could use to write these titles down? Yes, here. The cleric opened a drawer at the main desk and passed her a blank sheet and a pen. Ariya thanked Father Garma and began copying the information. I wonder if I'll find any mention of my parents being involved among the Gladstalkers. It's possible, although I'd imagine their work was much more clandestine, while Marikoth was more of the public face. I've yet to find anything regarding your family's involvement, but I'll let you know if I happen to find something else. Once Ariya completed jotting the titles of the articles, she returned the pen, while her eyes wandered to the window where the sun beamed through 3 empty glass bottles with frosted lettering labelled Tyran's Tipple. Those are pretty, she pointed to them. Are you a drink enthusiast? Father Garma turned around and made the widest grin she's ever seen.
You can certainly say that. If I wasn't a man of the cloth, I would probably be the town drunkard. He giggled mischievously. Brewing is a big hobby of mine, which is why I transported my beehives here, contrary to some of my colleagues' apiphobia. He reached for another piece of paper in a nearby stack and showed it to her. Ariya took the sheet and saw it to be a flyer, depicting 2 clinking steins of bubbly beer. On it were large stylized text reading, 322nd Crafters Conclave, 3rd to 4th day of the 3rd month, 807 post-Heavenfall. The elf raised her eyebrows in surprise. I thought the conclave was a religious event. Oh, it is. It's a contest amongst members of the Founder's clergy, and I plan to enter Tyran's Tipple this year. I've made many improvements to my techniques and methods, and even scoured for classic brewing equipment as old as museum pieces. My mead now has a subtle kick that enhances the smooth honey, and hopefully it'll finally surpass Mother Perilon's recipe. A rival? Ariya wondered. Garma folded his arms and smirked. Yes. Perilon's a priestess of Lutia, and has been the champion of the mead category for the past few years. The closest I've gotten was runner-up 2 years ago. Hopefully you'll win this year. I'd love to try a bottle if you have any on hand. I hope so as well. Win or lose, I'm sure it'll still be a very enjoyable time. Sadly, all of my samples are in storage for the big competition, but if there are any remaining after the conclave, I will give you a bottle. He craned his neck upwards to look towards the door and noticed another candidate waiting. One moment. Garma raised a finger to the new arrival before turning to Ariya. Was there anything else you need help with before I assist them? She shook her head in reply. Not at the moment. Out of curiosity, have you discovered anything regarding the case we were involved in? The cleric tilted his head in thought. Which case? The one at the mines? No, the one prior with Sentinel Valeria, regarding the student from Patoya Academy. Ah, that one. Yes, there's been some breakthroughs, but it's unfortunately not something I am privy to discuss with Academy students, he said hushedly. Ariya noticed his eyes quickly wandered to a drawer he had yet to interact with. I understand, Sentinel, she smiled. I won't bring it up again, and thank you. You've been most helpful. Ariya turned away to leave the office as the cleric greeted his other student. The entrance to the Academy chapel was a set of walnut double doors, flanked by 2 murals depicting the myth of the celestial founders. From left to right, it portrayed the 4 leaders arriving on Haven, alongside tens of thousands of Sophonts, refugees of numerous worlds and species over 50,000 years ago. Welcomed by the indigenous dragons, their eldest, Lutia,
fostered the rebuilding of civilization, and offered protection against the hostile elements that sought to impede their development. Once satisfied the foundations of their people's new home had been laid, the founders, Lutia, and their most ardent followers departed from Haven to form the Celestial Watch and guard the world from threats beyond. Deep into the night, a shadow stretched across the same mural as Ariya's hand pulled one of the doors to the chapel and slipped in. Dimly lit by candles and glass of the skylight above, the familiar interior of the nave was a perfect square, with each corner dedicated to one of the founders. At one corner was a statue of Zaylin, the administrator. They sat cross-legged on top of a pedestal with a small desk before them and a stylus held upwards. Clockwise was Tyran, the general. Clad in armour and holding a balance scale in their right hand, they stood straight and disciplined with a commanding presence. Next was Setin, the intellect. Their posture and attire were more relaxed and styled to resemble a teacher with an open book in the left hand. Lastly was Amaranth, the performer, whose statue was posed as if singing for all of the world to hear. Yet most resplendent among them was a draconic sculpture of crystal, suspended high above venerating Lutia. The moonlight shining through the skylight refracted upon the art piece like a chandelier, and gave it an ethereal glow that softly illuminated the chapel. Together, the eldest dragon and the 4 Sophont founders watched over the cold marble floor and all who ever came to worship them. Even though the chapel remained open while Father Gama was gone, Ariya thought the chamber would be empty well into the crossing of the 2nd hour. To her surprise, Kai was seen bowing before the shrine of Tyran with his sword and shield placed ceremoniously on the ground to be blessed. "Lady Malanti Ariya," he smiled fondly, still on his knees. "You were not someone I expected to see." "I didn't expect to see you either," she replied candidly. "Have you come to pray to the founders as well?" She shook her head and paused to come up with a diplomatic answer. "I'm not a follower of the faith. My family raised me to honour and respect them in the same way one would respect an ancestor or a historical figure, but we don't view them as divine. That would explain why I never see you during Mass. If you're not here to pray, why have you come?" The elf made a small shrug. "I sometimes like to wander and explore at night. It's fascinating to see the contrast of a busy academy against when it's dormant at hours like these. I can also better appreciate the art and architecture at a more relaxed pace, which brings me back to my museum days of when I had access to galleries after dark. I wish I could stay awake longer without rest to do more. It usually makes me nauseous to try, but tonight rest eludes me." Kai's face shifted from pleasant to worried while he gazed at Tyran. "Is something bothering you?" Ariya asked. The man gave a gentle nod. "My performance during the exams was not as stellar as I had hoped. I came to ask the general for forgiveness if I had wronged them, and to please lend strength to do better next time." "What went wrong?" Kai gave a tired shrug. "Almost everything. Both physical and written exams gave me issues, as I was unable to focus. Recent events have been bothering me, and I feel constant pressure from my family to succeed." Ariya noticed on the back of his robe was a large, circular sigil of intrinsic lines surrounding a lotus with many petals. "The stitching on the back?" she inquired. "Is that your family crest?" Kai nodded. "House Zeng. Once proud and powerful, and now we've fallen into exile." "I didn't know. I'm sorry to hear that." "There is no need to apologise. I would have been surprised if you knew the deeper intricacies of Shuwei politics. Have you at least heard of how House Toko usurped the throne from the ruling House Chao?" Ariya passed through her memories and recalled her family discussions. "I did. It disrupted trade relations between Mistoria and Shuwei 4 years ago, since we were allied to the Chaos. Hegemon Victrix denounced the coup and refused to trade with the new government of Shuwei, but caved into political pressure to reopen relations. I wish more people would agree on the illegitimacy of House Toko. Unfortunately, alliances and honour can be fickle when economics are involved. My clan had to flee the country because of our close ties to House Chow. We've lost much, and I'm not sure what the future holds for my family, but I must do everything in my power to help us regrow our strength. And that's why you feel pressure to do well? He nodded again. It's my duty as the eldest son. I can empathise as an only child. Did the fact also trouble you during your assessments here? Ariya shook her head. Making my family proud was on my mind, but I've lived long enough to no longer have it be my main concern. I chose to pursue this career myself, and they fully support it. My mother and her extended family used to tell me I should study arcana and work for an innovative company. I did try to for a time, but it wasn't for me. I'm content to be where I am, although I'm sure they still wish I was an arcanist like they were. Kai scoffed. My father pushed me to join the Sentinels to become stronger physically and mentally. I'm sure he also meant to help build a political reputation too. Was becoming a Sentinel not something you wanted to do? He breathed deeply with an uncomfortable shift in body posture. I ask myself that from time to time, which is why I was going to seek guidance from Tyran next. How much longer will you remain here? Ariya asked, hoping he would depart soon so she could continue her mission. Either until I tire, the sun rises, or I feel more at peace. Would you like to join me in meditation? Not tonight, she answered, quickly eyeing the side door for the hallway connected to the rectory. I'm afraid I'm suddenly not feeling well, and I need to use the restroom. Ariya gently patted her abdomen. As tasty as spicy food is, elven stomachs are much more sensitive compared to the local cuisine. Oh dear, please excuse yourself. There's a restroom over there. He pointed to the same door. Thank you. I'll let you get back to your prayers. She bid farewell before moving towards the entryway. Crossing the threshold led Ariya back to the familiar corridor leading to Garma's office, with the restrooms directly in across. She pushed the door to make it sound as if she was going in, but instead crept towards the cleric's room instead. Once Ariya arrived at her destination, she retrieved her pack of lockpicks and began considering methods. While the office door was of an older wooden material, the lock was more recently retrofitted with a newer pin-tumbler-style lock. Brute force through skeleton keys would be of little use, and she would have to rely on a tension wrench and a hook or rake to break in. The elf inserted a shallow hook pick all the way to the rear of the cylinder before dragging it back towards her. 4 pins, she whispered after counting how many times it was caught in the motion. By counting how many times it caught a pin, she determined it was a simple 4-pin tumbler. She opted to try a rake pick that had more of a wavy appearance rather than a single hook. Ariya inserted the wrench first at the bottom of the keyhole and then the rake above, and began oscillating the pick. After a few moments, the pins lined up properly and gave way to the wrench's turn. Garma's office was left almost as she remembered, if not a bit more cluttered than before. Following the memory of where the cleric's eyes wandered, Ariya swung around the desk and knelt down to open a cabinet. To her lack of surprise, there were more papers and files piled in a messy stack. Nevertheless, skimming the text of the topmost folders revealed she had guessed correctly the location of investigative records. Ariya's nosy curiosity wanted to dive into all of the cases, but with time being a luxury, she could only afford to search for documents relating to Coley's death. Fortunately, she did not need to dig far in the stack. Within the case file was a physical examination and toxicology report on Coley, detailing a list of different chemical compounds. Garma found no traces of poisons or drugs, except for caffeine and recreational flayleaf. As for the physical report, Coley's mother ultimately denied a full autopsy, so any medical examination could only be done at the surface level.
However, there were signs of physical trauma within her left nostril, and speculation that surgical extraction of some kind was performed. Follow-up Arcana reports were the most difficult to comprehend, with many instances of jargon, equations, and complex terminology. However, Ariya understood enough to deduce the Sentinels had analysed arc particles near Coley and the surrounding air. Multiple pages contained different sets of line charts representing the waves of primary to denary frequencies used to compare between signatures sampled throughout the watchhouse. Garma concluded the residual spellcraft in the air and those around Coley did not match the inmates or building's employees. What was most unsettling was the fact the readings were not typical of belonging to a Sophont. Ariya hoped the rest of the report would identify the creature, but Garma wrote it would be followed up on a later date. Unfortunately, local experts in arcwave analysis deemed this case to be lower priority and placed it in their backlog. The elf quickly paraphrased in her notebook as many details as she could and did her best to sketch the waves belonging to the unknown assailant. She then closed the file, carefully placed it back in the cabinet, and triple-checked that she left no traces of her intrusion. She then exited and retraced her steps back to the chapel, audibly reopening and the restroom door on the way out. Kai had remained where he was previously, with legs folded and eyes closed in meditation. Ariya began to leave quietly, but froze when she heard him calling out to her. "Before you go, I wanted to give thanks," he said, while remaining seated. "You've given me much to think about and helped restore some faith." Ariya cocked her head in his direction. "How so?" "I came here searching for guidance, but perhaps they sent you to be their messenger." She smiled at the sentiment. "I'm honoured you think so. Have a good night, Kai." "You as well. I wish you success." Ariya nodded as she departed, smiling that she did indeed accomplish her objective.